Welcome to Storytelling with Data, the podcast where listeners around the world learn to be better storytellers and presenters with best-selling author, speaker, and workshop guru Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Cole.
So I am super excited today to be sitting here in actually what this morning was snowy Seattle with Ben Jones. Ben is founder of Data Literacy. He recently had his second book published, Avoiding Data Pitfalls. We're going to talk about all of that and much more today. Ben, welcome.
Thanks, Cole. Great to be here. Welcome back home.
Oh, thank you. I was trying to think back to some of our early conversations, and I think you're one of those people who I knew for a long time through like email and social media and that sort of stuff before we, like for many years before we actually met in person.
Yeah, I seem to remember that being the case. And then what was it? Maybe, was it a Tapestry where we met?
I think we met finally at Tapestry because I think that was part of the outreach and why because I remember conversation after conversation where it was like several years in a row that you'd reached out and said, come to Tapestry.
Yeah.
And my response every time was,
I'm pregnant.
Or I just had a baby.
That's right. I was like, one of these days. Yeah, we had this data storytelling conference and I was like, we got to get Cole to come speak. And you're right, it was maybe 3 years in a row where you had like a family reason you couldn't make it. But finally we got you to come to, I think it was the St. Augustine one, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. I think Florida. It was 2017 maybe?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
That was a great one.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think strikes me about you and your work is this inclusive desire, right? You want everyone to be able to take part. You also, actually, another anecdote sort of related to this, you introduced me to RJ Andrews. Mm-hmm. So I remember one time you reaching out and saying, hey, I know him, I know you, I think you guys might actually like live down the street from each other. And it turned out that was the case. We were almost neighbors.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember making that connection. RJ is such a talented guy, and you all live right next to each other, and you all are right there too with Catherine. So Catherine Madden there, and what a great little data hub that was there for a while until you all decided to get out of the Bay Area and the craziness there.
Yeah, Catherine and I just missed each other because she was just coming into San Francisco.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
So I love this. So you connect people, are inclusive, and I have to think it's some of those things that I've observed in these cases that have gotten you to where you are and maybe even been the impetus for some of the stuff that you're doing with data literacy.
Yeah, I'm a middle child, so I guess bringing people together is what I'm supposed to do. But I really like all the different communities that are out there, and it is a goal I have to try to bridge across some of the different subgroups in order to build a more connected, broader data community at the level of ideas and concepts. I think there's a really strong tool-based sub-communities right now, which is great, and it'll always be the case. I don't think there's a problem with that. I just think it's also great to start to connect across them, because a lot of the times we're looking at the same challenges and trying to solve some of the same problems, maybe just using a slightly different approach, but there's a lot that can be learned there, which is what I loved about that little Tapestry conference we ran for all those years with Robert Kosara.
Yeah.
And that's what we were trying to do, was bring together not just tool-based groups, but also practitioners and academics and designers and journalists, anyone who's interested in this topic of storytelling with data, that if we got them all in one room, when we say all, it was that nice small number where everybody feels like they get to bump into just about everybody.
Maybe 100-ish people?
Yeah, like 100, 120 maybe is what we targeted. And so everybody really got to know each other a little better, and we learned from each other. So that was a fun event that really, I think, got me addicted to getting people connected in a way. Yeah.
So I've written down communities and bringing communities together because I definitely want to come back to that.
Cool.
I have some questions for you. The team has some questions for you. We put this out to the Storytelling with Data community and have folks who've raised
Congrats
questions.
on that, by the way. Nice new community. I love that page.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
we're
neat.
having fun with it. But I think before we do any of that, for those listening who may not know Ben Jones, can you talk to us about the journey you've taken?
Yeah.
How did you come to do what you're doing today?
Sure. Yeah. So it goes back to, I guess, engineering school, and then going into kind of Six Sigma movement in a medical device company where I was training people on how to use data and statistics and charts and graphs to improve their processes. And that really got me hooked on data. And so then I remember I made a phone call one time, just out of the blue, to this person named Alex Curran, who had won a dashboard contest. And I asked him, I said, could you give me 30 minutes of your time? I'd just like to know how you do what you do.
How did you come to know of the?
I just saw, I was following, this is back in maybe 2009, 2010, and I was kind of lurking.
You're working as an engineer at this point?
Yeah, as a trainer, as a data trainer at a company called Medtronic in the LA area. But I was reading Flowing Data by Nathan Yao. I was reading Visualizing Data by Andy Kirk, just sort of soaking it in and really blown away by all the amazing dialogue that was starting up around data. And so Alex was a person too that I noticed he'd won this dashboard building contest, and I was really impressed with something he made online because I could interact with it. And I was really blown away. I didn't know how to do that. I was using Excel and Minitab, things at that time that I did not know how to make interactive. Excel is pretty amazing what you can do nowadays on the interactive side of things, but I just wanted to learn. So I said, could you give me 30 minutes of your time? He said yes. He was telling me all about ProtoViz, which is a precursor to D3. Okay. And so I was just resigned to the fact that I was going to need to learn to code. So long story short, at the very end of the call, and this was back in 2011, he says, oh, you might want to check out something called Tableau Public. It's free to download. And it just released it. And I'd never heard of Tableau or Tableau Public or anything. And so I said, okay, I'll try it out. So I downloaded it. And it was really surprised at how easy it was to get interactive data online with that platform. And so started to put things out there on my site, and that I just launched Data Remixed. And then that's when I kind of got roped into this early days of the Tableau community, and then had a chance to move up here with my family to Seattle to lead the Tableau Public platform.
Yeah. So tell us about that jump, right? You go from being introduced to Tableau Public, you like it, it provides some interactivity, to now you're working at Tableau.
Yeah, it was so neat. I couldn't believe that a year and a half after starting a blog, I was replacing my career, right, with this new data, which is what I wanted. I wanted to be in the data world.
And is the blog, do you think, what got you?
Yeah, it's the only reason why. I think it's the only reason why. At the time, I was getting interviews with Facebook as well as ESPN. Both of those at that time for me were dream opportunities.
Sure.
One was in San Francisco, one was in Connecticut. And I just thought to myself, well, I don't want to make this decision about what's next in my career without talking to Tableau. So I had won that Iron Viz contest, and I was going back and forth with people at the company, people like Ross Perez, who's now at Snowflake, people like Ellie Fields, who's still at Tableau, and just started to realize they were really cool, And I was like, wow, the people there seem great, their product seems great. And then in the lead up to this little contest I was in San Diego, I just said, well, hey, would you ever be interested in having someone like me run Tableau Public? And they said, well, let's talk about that. And so a few months after losing the Iron Viz contest to a fabulously talented designer named Anya Ahern, good friend of mine, I got the job at Tableau. And so that was wild for me. It was so exciting. I got a chance to really step into this, a product I was already promoting. I didn't need to get paid. I was already doing that. So it sounded like a great thing and a natural thing for me to spend my time doing. And then it just really took off. It was such an amazing growth phase. I'm curious,
so think back, that would have been like, what, 2012?
Yeah, 2013. So 2013. January 2013 is when I moved to Seattle. Okay. So what's that, like 7 years ago?
Yeah. How many people was Tableau at that point, do you remember?
Oh, he was right around 600. Okay. And it was pretty much the lead up to going public. It was 5 months from that point in time that they went public. And so we already kind of knew that was what was happening. And then the company just started growing and growing. It's over 4,000, I think, people now. And so it went from, a company of, still sort of had a startup feel when I was there, when I first joined, but rapidly grew to what felt like, more of like a mid-sized company feel, but still retained a lot of what was really special about the company. So that was a nice thing, that the growth, I didn't feel like those days, the growth didn't cause it to lose, what it was all about, right? But yeah, that was a fun few years for me there, being a part of this platform that was just growing so fast.
Yeah, so, and you wrote a book about this as well.
Yeah, so then January 2013, I joined a company and started writing the book, Communicating Data with Tableau, right around that same time, maybe a couple months later, and published that in 2014. And that helped kind of really start to the beginning, what planted the seeds of the next phase of my career, because with that book, I got the chance to teach a class at University of Washington, and that was all about data visualization theory. And so I started to really kind of learn that art of teaching and training, taking what I'd done in the Six Sigma world, applying it to data visualization and analytics, and started to realize how much I love it. I mean, so many people were just getting so excited about finally getting amazing results out of data for the first time for many of them,
Yeah. And when you were teaching, were you teaching students Tableau or?
Yeah, it was teaching them data visualization theory, and then we would teach them a variety of tools. But I think maybe 80% of the tool focus was Tableau.
Sure.
Then another 20% was trying to drip in some other tools so that they got a little of a blend. But yeah, we tried a few different formulas there and felt that ultimately having one primary tool focus along with a few other secondary tools seemed like it was the best mix. When we tried to mix it completely, people felt like they didn't really learn much of anything.
Yeah.
So we did settle on Tableau Public because it was a free tool they could use in the class. So yeah, and then we eventually used the academic programs offering with Tableau to be able to just give them licenses. So anyway, that was pretty neat for them too. But I just got hooked on that being part of someone's light bulb moment started to become such a really neat thing. And I realized that was really what I wanted to spend a lot of my time doing, rather than climbing a very awesome corporate ladder, but still one that I felt like wasn't really giving me the chance to do the best things that I love to do. So,
and
yeah.
You were at Tableau for a while, right?
Yep, just about 6 years there, and some good years there. Really, really fun time, great people, and learned a lot. And ultimately, like you said, this ability to connect and be part of a platform as well as Tapestry and other things, the conferences that got me connected to so many amazing, talented people. I realized that was a great asset that Tableau had helped me build for myself. And so
absolutely. Well,
yeah.
It seems like it helped to reinforce something you'd already started to do, right?
Yeah.
You find the tool, you start writing about it, then you get the job, and you just this self-propelling sort of path.
It was like that. It felt like that too. Yeah.
And it's coincidental that you say light bulb moment, right? And enjoying seeing these light bulb moments. Because actually one of the questions from the community, from David Johnston, was, did you have a particular light bulb moment that set you on the path of championing data literacy? Or was it more a case of slowly evolving, recurring thoughts that brought you to this point?
Yeah, so there's a few.
Well, and how did you decide
moments.
to leave Tableau, right? I'm interested in that too, that transition of, okay, I'm done. You said, climbing the corporate ladder, now I'm going to do this thing on my own. How did you get to that point?
I started to get people to ask me varieties of a very similar question. They would say, I think it's great that you show us how to make, I don't know, let's say a histogram. And that's awesome. And we really love your videos, and we really love all that you do to help us get better at that. But then they said, Ben, did you know that really, unfortunately, there's nobody here at our company that knows what that means. They don't know what that means.
Oh, interesting.
And so
the people creating the graphs were bought in, but encountering a lack of understanding from their audience.
Yeah, and executives of those companies too saying, hey, do you have anything to teach a general understanding of these sort of chart types, but also important aspects of data like context and variation. So we don't really, the tool stuff you've given us is so amazing, thank you. And it got so good. The on-demand videos, the training outfit at Tableau just grew over the time I was there. And they're really, really good. But so many people started asking for something a little bit different. And it was really, the best thing I could describe is they were just asking for data literacy training.
Yeah.
They just wanted to know, do they have a program that could help people with the basics, and going from maybe even being data phobic to being someone more comfortable and confident.
And when you say data literacy, can you tell me about what you mean? Because I feel like sometimes people use that term and mean very different things.
Yeah, totally. I know. And so with every term, there's some good things and bad things about it. So data literacy, what does that mean to me? That's the ability to read, understand, create, and communicate data as information. So I feel like there's really two aspects to that. There's the communication side where you're creating charts and graphs for people, presentations for people. And then there's the audience, there's the consumers, the people that need to take that in and make decisions, do something with it. Both need to be speaking the same language in order for that connection to happen. And so that's what I understand data literacy to be. And I think there's opportunities on both sides of that coin to teach people to be better, more highly data literate. And so I wrote a little ebook when I started the business where I broke it down into 17 key traits.
And you provide that for download, right?
Yeah, you can get that on the page and download that.
We'll make sure we link to that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's just on dataliteracy.com, my site. You can go down to the bottom and see a little link there. And really, I break that up into knowledge, skills, but also attitudes and behaviors. How do people think and feel about data? What are the ways they act day in and day out when they come into the office? Those are just as important as the facts and pieces of information that they know, concepts that they grasp. as well as all the amazing tools they know how to use. Just as important to that as well, what do you think data is for? What are some aspects of your role that allow you to leverage all of that? And so to me, that's what data literacy is all about. And like I said, I felt that there was a gap there. There's this massive education gap out there. We've had so much, maybe like 2000 to 2010, we started amassing databases at an incredible scale, and that's continued. I feel like right around 2010, when I started getting involved with the community up until now, there was this massive evolution of tools, just amazing things, new tools. And so now I feel like the biggest opportunity is on the skill side, on the knowledge side, is people's abilities to leverage all of that in a team environment, So that's what caused me to want to lead Tableau. It's feeling like there was an opportunity there for me to address that in a way that also connected with something I love to do, because I was getting so excited about that light bulb moment for people at the University of Washington, figuring this is a perfect mix of what I love to do, what's needed. And ultimately, I'd done a little MBA program just prior to launching my blog, and I knew I wanted to do
A little MBA program?
Yeah, it was. No, it was little. It really was. It was at California Lutheran University. It was a little hometown college here in Thousand Oaks where I grew up. And I had little babies at the time, in diapers. And so one class a night is the best I could work in. A little program. I wanted to do the big UCLA program, but I did and I really learned a lot. And it was all about entrepreneurship. And I realized that I will never know how to be an entrepreneur based on classes and books, right? I had to get in there and roll it up and try it. And I knew I needed to do that. And I felt like if I got to 80 or 85 and I looked back and said I never tried it, I would really be mad at myself for this moment in time if I didn't do this business right now.
And was there a single moment, right? You brought up earlier this idea of, I go in and I have this thought during my day at Tableau. Is that the point?
That was a moment. There was a couple other moments, where you start to realize that there's something more effective that you could be spending your time doing,
But I think even recognizing that, still taking the jump of the sure thing, right? And going off and doing something on your own.
Yeah.
How did you?
That was excruciating. That was so difficult. I think a favorite author of mine, who I think his behavior is not that great, is this guy named Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and he's a genius. He wrote a book called Fooled by Randomness, The Black Swan, Anti-Fragile. Great books. Don't follow him on Twitter because he's not nice to people, but that's another story. But yeah, he talks about a regular paycheck being, the most addictive substance, more than heroin, right? And it is true. It's so hard to step away from that, this regular cadence that is going to be something you can use to just fund your life, your lifestyle, or whatever it is. So to do that, to break away from that, I really had to have a few pieces of the puzzle in place for me. One was my ex-wife, Sarah. She was really helpful and offered to take healthcare for my kids. So I have teenage boys. I couldn't go a day without that. And so she did that. And I was really thankful for that. My wife, Becky, also just put me on her insurance. And so some of those enabling pieces, healthcare insurance is such a big part of it. It's crazy that those things are so connected. Your livelihood and your career and your ability to get care at the doctor's office. It's weird and I don't like it, but I had to solve those pieces of the puzzle before I could walk away, before I feel comfortable that it was a responsible thing I was doing.
Exactly.
But then also just the emotional side of it, I really started to read some Hindu texts like the Bhagavad Gita, as well as just the Upanishads and some other texts that really help you kind of let go of so much need for the outcome or the result to be a certain thing. And just let it be what it is, and just put yourself into what you do. Full effort is full reward. Don't be so hung up on what does or doesn't happen. Also, the Tao Te Ching, this notion that, what's better, failure or success? They each have their own positive and negative impacts on your life that are really hard to predict. And so, just helping me get to the place in my own mind where I was okay trying something, no matter where it went.
And learning from the process, right? No matter what it is.
Just going for it and having fun with it, doing the best I can do, letting the chips fall where they may. I can't control the outcome of this business. I can't, have perfect influence on all those other market factors and what does or doesn't land well. I can just do my best,
and you control the energy that you put into it, right? When you found something that you're passionate about, which it sounds like you have done. So how long have you been doing this? You went out on your
so a
own?
little over a year now. So December 2018 is when I left. And then, so it's been a bit more than a year. And the first 2 quarters, quarter 1, quarter 2, that's white knuckle time, because the sales cycles take a while.
And can you talk to us a bit about what does data literacy do? What sort of services do you provide?
Yeah, so my little company here, really what we do is we offer training and education services to mostly companies, but also government agencies to help them learn the language of data. There's a few levels to that. I thought when I first launched that the starting point level was going to be helping people work with raw data. And actually, you mentioned RJ Andrews. He's on my board of advisors, and he told me a few months before I launched, he said, Ben, you really should just do something even more basic than that, like a class that just teaches people how to read and interpret data visualizations. Yeah. And I kind of felt like, well, I mean, that sounds a little basic. Don't people already know that?
The audience of
yes,
data.
Right. Yep. So you're a person that comes in, you see dashboards, they're in your own financial software, websites you log into, they're right there in your company meetings, you're feeling like you don't have what it takes to understand them, and let's help people accomplish that. And so I've been surprised that has been, so now that's what I call level 1. So level 1 is just really about reading and interpreting charts and graphs. Level 2 is where you roll up the sleeves and say, I need to be able to make my own. I need to be able to not just trust what someone else is showing me, I need to also be able to check that and analyze it myself. And that's more what has typically been an analyst role, but nowadays is so much more than
it's everybody, pretty much, right? I mean, everybody touches data.
So many people now that don't have analyst in their title are working with raw data, that's also a really popular program. And now what's blown me away is that there's a level 0 demand, which I did not even expect. And it's really
interesting.
Yeah, it's really people saying, I just want to know what data is and how it applies to me. I did not see that coming. I had so many people reach out to me say, well, your charts and graphs class level 1, that sounds great, but Ben, we have something we need before that, which is just there's so many people in our organization that really don't know what data is supposed to be used for, and how it applies to them.
Are there certain types of organizations where you're seeing this more than others? I'm particularly interested about the level 0, right? Because I wouldn't have thought that either.
Are there certain types? So I've had a nonprofit ask me, I've had a Fortune 500 company ask me, I've had a government agency ask me.
So then right? Everywhere.
Yeah. So I don't know, and also it's small numbers for me, right? So it's very small n. So I don't know if I could have seen enough to be able to answer the question, what's different about groups that are asking for that? But I've just noticed that it's been a pretty wide and varied cross-section that is asking for it.
And when you're working with groups, you're going there, you're spending time with them in person, or what does that look like?
Mostly I'm traveling to them and spending time with them in their conference rooms. Also doing some virtual trainings with some teams that are maybe remote or dispersed. And so I like using Zoom to connect with people with video conferencing. That works great.
And is this typically an ongoing relationship?
Yeah, it'll be. So I'm just year 1. So a lot of what I did in year 1 was pilot programs with people. Hey, let's take 20 or 30 people, walk them through some of your programs, see how that goes. So now I'm going through the phase of kind of going back and talking with those companies that ran pilots to see what they want to do next. Yeah. And so that gets to a question of scale, right? So how do I get this content to 1,000 or 5,000 people? And that's usually a very different kind of product, which is going to be, I think, what a lot of my year 2 is all around experimenting and learning how to get great at delivering on-demand kinds of materials for people that it's also still a good experience for them. Yeah. Because I don't think that's as easy as it sounds. I think, how do you make that experience great? It's easier when you're there and you're in the room and you can get the vibe going and you can respond to them. And
you can see the looks on people's faces and react to that, right?
Right. How do you do that if you're staring into a camera, delivering files to people? I think it's a very different challenge, but one I don't think I can accomplish the goal of my organization without figuring out how to do that well.
Without scaling.
Yeah. Figuring out how to get that kind of content in front of the eyes of order of magnitude higher number of people is something I'm going to at least try it out and see how it goes.
All right, so year 1 is around testing things, piloting things, putting stuff out there.
Really just developing the programs too. Like, what are these programs? How do they work?
Yeah.
I had all these ideas when I launched it, and very much then you start to talk to people and realize that it isn't really what you expected, Yeah.
And modifying course, adjusting as needed sometimes, right?
Totally.
Talk to me about so you had your second book came out late last year, Avoiding Data Pitfalls. How does that fit into all of this? And I want to talk about the book itself too.
Right. So good question. I mean, for me, teaching people kind of like with grammar, right? So, a lot of it is learning the rules and learning what works. And sometimes there are rules of thumb, which I'm a big believer in data, but there's also teaching people what not to do, and that's what Avoiding Data Pitfalls is mostly about, which is, think of like grammar. If I say, take the sentence, let's eat, Grandpa. And then I take the comma out of there. The meaning of that sentence changes
That's a good
dramatically in a really kind of disturbing way. So my apologies to the listeners. But data's the same way. You can take one little detail and you get that detail wrong. Now all of a sudden the understanding people get is actually like dead wrong, you know. And so Avoiding Data Pitfalls, the book, was about my journey of making lots of mistakes with data, seeing students make some of those same mistakes, realizing it would be helpful to write about that. I think there's a class there, you know, I need to develop that. And certainly my publisher and editor would like me to do that. I think that keeps the book going and gives it life beyond just that launch moment. So that'll be down the road here. But yeah, I think of it as just focusing on a handful of things to avoid, you know, things not to do, common errors. And so
and you started writing while still at Tableau, right?
Yeah, that's a whole crazy story too there. I mean, it took me 5 years to write the book.
When you talk a little bit about this in the book itself.
Yeah, and really kind of like, you know, life take twists and turns that sometimes can get you away from your best of intentions to complete projects. So that's certainly what happened to me, but came back to finally finishing it. And actually you factored in, because I know you are the one who introduced me to my editor over there at Wiley, and always in the back of my mind I felt like I didn't want to let you down, so I knew I needed to come back to finishing
accountability
that thing.
is good when you set goals.
I know. I was like, I can't see you here at the next tapestry and tell her I've only written one more chapter. So yeah, I finally got around to finishing it, and I also have to give a lot of credit to my wife Becky for helping me create a climate in my life where there was more positive kind of energy going forward that allowed me to push the ball across the goal line there. So yeah, but I like writing. It's just that crazy feeling where, you know, where you've got a final to write in college and you're always going out with your friends, but you're feeling like, oh, I need to be working on this final paper.
Yeah, hangs over you.
And that's writing a book, but it happens for a whole year or two or three, right?
Or 5,
in my case, half a decade of always feeling, anytime I'm doing something fun, oh, I should be doing this. So that's a emotional roller coaster ride in and of itself.
It is.
Yeah.
And so I've read Avoiding Data Pitfalls.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into when I opened it. And
Okay.
I was a little intimidated by the table of contents, because the first data pitfall, can you say it out loud for us?
Oh, epistemic errors? Is
Yes.
that what it is?
See, I didn't even know how to say that.
Oh, yeah, epistemology. Yeah.
So talk to us about what that is. And then one of the things I love, by the way, is, I shouldn't have been surprised by this, because I know you, and I know you're writing from your blog and from other places.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I really appreciated and enjoyed about the book is the conversational style, right? And you bring so many of your own anecdotes and examples into it. The examples are very accessible and varied throughout, and there's this very much like your niceness comes through, if that makes sense. There's no condemning people for making mistakes. It's like, we've all done this, and hey, I've done this, and here I can laugh at myself about this now, but here's the pitfall I fell into, and how you can look out for it, and how you can avoid it, and the tone of everything was really nice.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm Canadian. My teenage son tells me I have to be nice because I'm Canadian. So yeah, I just got my U.S. citizenship a couple months ago, which was finally. I've been here since I was 8. But anyway, yeah. So there's that. But also, I feel like the climate right now is so caustic. I mean, everybody is so harsh, and everybody loves pointing at the person that screws up, and the whole cancel culture, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think on the one hand, we're dealing with very real issues, and that's good. On the other hand, it seems like the piling on and the playground bully component, there's just too much of it, and so I don't think we're going to get very
in
far.
Social media, or where are you seeing this?
in culture, in our society in general. I don't see it too much in the data communities. I feel like we've done a pretty good job steering clear of the worst of that.
No, but there is some of the dogmatic, right? Always do this, never do that, which, as you talk about in the book, is sort of the fundamentally wrong language. Well, I now put that in the terms that we shouldn't be, but right, that there are gray areas, or there's always a good use case for something.
I feel like that. I really feel like our generation now has been the one to bring that about, because I remember back in 2010, 2011, when I first started blogging, it was that, there are rules. If you don't follow them, you get pointed out and laughed at, et cetera. And I remember my first visualization I ever published to the web has a photograph of a hero of mine, Wayne Gretzky, right behind the data. And I remember thinking,
you reposted this recently, right?
Yeah, I did. It was my very first Tableau public visualization I ever put out there. I still think it's my best. I had to buy the image from Getty to put it out there, and eventually got around to doing that. But I remember thinking at the time, oh my gosh, there's all these data viz purists are going to hate on me for this chart chunk. It's a scatter plot and it's got a hockey player picture behind it. And everybody's going to say all that ink is not necessary, et cetera, et cetera. But it just felt perfect to me. The way the hockey stick is going through the data and making a cloud, and then the outlier up there in the top right by the hockey player's face. And so anyway, long story short, I just kind of bit the bullet and put it out there, expecting the worst. Even in the blog post where I write about it, I'm saying the data gods are going to hate on me, et cetera. And so I feel like we've moved away from that to some degree.
I think there's growing recognition that there are multiple reasons that you might choose to visualize data, and efficiency or knowledge transfer isn't the only reason.
Right. So there's an openness to the gray area, which also means, we do sometimes get it wrong more often now, but there's more experimentation. And I think that that's okay. It's interesting to see what direction it'll go in next. But but I feel like a part of that was being willing to allow each one of us to try things, to get things wrong, to live and learn, to have a conversation around what works well, what doesn't work as well, as opposed to having it be this black and white world where you either got it 100% right or you got it 100% wrong, And data is just not like that either. There's so many nuances, subtleties about what might be true, but what might not quite be what you think it is.
Yep.
And that's the epistemic error chapter 1 right there, was all about our tendency, I think partly anyway, to assume that if it's data, it's right.
Yes.
And
really people have a really strong desire to want to do this. I think both the people analyzing the data, but then also the audiences, right, of taking data as truth.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Why do we really fall back on that?
I think that we have this idea that numbers are hard fact, but you do a really good job of pointing out and walking us through so many examples where they might be when you frame it correctly, right? When we use the right wording around it, but we make so many generalizations off of these things that are no longer fact.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Examples of bikes across the Fremont Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Or, even when it comes to the same person rating things at different points in time, right? Bananas.
Right.
Comes to mind.
That was a fun little, I played a joke, I feel bad about that one. I played a joke on my social media following by having them do this little survey where I showed them bananas, and have them rate them, and then tricking them by putting the picture in there twice. But that's just to kind of realize that, we don't always get it right. It's not always perfect. Also, with the bikes example, that crazy spike might not be a lot of bikes. It might be a bad sensor, and that's not usually the first thing we think about. For some reason, it's sometimes not something we think about at all. And so then,
is it because we're so quickly after the answer? Do you think?
I think this species of ours, we're just so addicted to the feeling of being right, and so data gives us that shortcut to feeling like we know, and that's really tempting to want to be there. And it's harder to be in this middle area where maybe we know, but maybe we don't know, and there's tension there.
Or here's where we know, and here's you use one phrase at a point that I think you borrowed from someone else, but exploring the contours of the data.
Yes, that's from Michael Mixon. Yeah, he said it. I'll never forget it. I mean, he said that phrase, and it's just like it lodged itself in my mind. But this idea, some people call it profiling your data, or getting its kind of characteristic traits. Just see what's there before you start asking real questions of it. Just look around, see what's the highs and lows.
Well, and you provide some really practical tips for that, right? Of look at what the range has been historically. Are you still in that range? Are you not in that range? Here are questions to ask.
Yeah, and I've done. I know that little list because I've messed up every one of those. But in my level 2 class, we walked through a 10-point kind of contour checklist, and I don't think that needs to be something that takes 4 hours. It can just be a 15, 20-minute little...
It's like a gut check almost, right?
Right. Are there nulls? Yes, no. Okay, where are they? Why are they there? Are there, like you said, what's the min and max? Is there a time field? Well, when does the data start and when does it end? And why does it start and end there? Those questions.
Are totals included in your audit?
Oh my gosh, that's such an embarrassing one for me. Yeah, if there's totals in there, don't add everything up because then you get a double or maybe a quadruple if you don't know what you're looking at there. If we don't know if those things are there and then we start just dragging and dropping with today's amazingly powerful analytics software, we might get a very wrong answer and feel we're very right.
And I wonder as well, because some of those things are so easy, right? The aggregation, the dragging and dropping, as you talk about, we're more inclined maybe to want to jump there before doing the requisite things to get to know our data in ways that would help us from doing some of these things.
I think the software gives you the place to start there. That's often step one. In fact, it's the default. If you just drag something out there, or double click even sometimes, it'll sum things up or average things, maybe without you even knowing that's what it's doing. And so that's tricky, that's dangerous. And I think it's powerful because that is oftentimes the first thing you want to do, but only when maybe you have a good grasp of the data and what's there. And that's actually one of the questions that came through with the community too. Just this idea about what do I do if I have no idea about the data and the variables. And what was the question that came through there?
I think it's this one. So this is from Cassandra Sherrill. As a journalist, I'm often presented with data whose specifics are unfamiliar to me, and there's often not a data dictionary to help clear things up or somebody readily available to ask. Are there any tips for getting up to speed on data I don't know much about? Is there something beyond lots of reading up or things I should look to for help?
Yeah, I think there's no shortcut here, but I do think exploring the contours like we were talking about, which is what made me think about that question, that is a good starting point. And then oftentimes the journalists I had a chance to get to know and work with while I was leading the Tableau public platform would always think of it like interviewing your data. And asking a set of questions of that data. But then really, like you would, kind of being skeptical of what you hear back, maybe even, I hate to say interrogating, but that can be sort of the atmosphere of I really want to scrutinize this resource that I have, like any resource, and really figure out what are its biases, what are its weak points. But then ultimately, I think it is good to reach out to the data owner. And maybe I appreciate, because the question by Cassandra, she's a journalist. Sometimes I really feel for them. Sometimes they have maybe an hour or two, and they've got to get something out with the news cycle being so tight.
And this, by the way, is not unlike the corporate world, right? Where you're in a business and you've been told, you need it by the next meeting. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so then we sometimes have to roll with what we've got. And then maybe I think talking about the caveats of the unknowns or the questions that are still unresolved, I think is important to put them out there so that we don't give people the false impression that there's certainty where there's not.
How do you do that, though? Because this is a question that comes up for us a lot that we spend a lot of time discussing and talking through with groups, which is, how do you figure out how much you should caveat your data, right? Because if you over caveat, then people...
You just pull the rug out from under your own feet, and now they're just tuning you out.
But then there's the alternate side of that, where you don't share enough of some of the assumptions or the way things could be wrong or how things are estimated, where people might make a different decision as a result of some of those things.
Totally, and then set them down the wrong path there. I think it's a balance. I'd love to hear, it sounds like this comes up in the workshops a lot. I'd love to hear what people say, because I don't have a really great answer to that other than
there's no great answer. Right?
I think it's a balance. You've got to really strike that balance of this is enough information where they know the source. Basically, they've got to know the source, and they've got to know maybe some of the details around what that data set involves. Maybe there's a sample, they need to understand that. How is it chosen? Without having 4 slides of, thousands of words of describing all the nuances of the background. Sometimes what I've seen journalists do well is there's a methods tab or an about tab or a section where anything you want to know about the data is there, and someone can replicate what you've done or at least understand all the steps of what you've done, which is
a nice thing to think about as you're doing an analysis, right? To do that for yourself, because I think doing something like that, one, it makes it more replicable, whether it's by us in the future or by someone else, but then it makes you think about those decisions.
That enforces a discipline, I think, it slows you down, but it gives you a disciplined approach that helps you avoid some of the errors that I talk about in the book. But then also, that's all over here. If you want to know anything, here you go. Here's the list of all of our methods and techniques, the sources, their limitations. It's all there. So no one's trying to sweep anything under the rug. And then, here are the 2 or 3 most important points for everyone to know out of that, about page. Maybe it's like, we sampled and there were 1,000 respondents, right? That was an email survey. Here's the people that were chosen. So those, I think, kind of what are the key talking points that comes out of those details?
When we'll often come back to, right, if we're a little bit wrong, does that change things fundamentally? Like, is the outcome or the direction we're going to go fundamentally different? Or if we get things a little bit wrong, directionally we're still sort of going down the same path. Because those are 2 very different scenarios.
I think so, and I think is that someone mentioned in the questions too, this idea of the, what's it called, the rats?
The riskiest assumptions to test. So
riskiest assumptions
Graham
to test.
Gourlay brought this up, and his question is about storytelling with data, best practices on how to present. A precursor to this is having sufficiently high-grade data to use. What techniques do you recommend for quality checking data prior to using or publishing it?
And that's that. So you're having assumptions about the data. what's the riskiest assumption you're making?
Yeah.
And then how do you test that? That's a genius approach. I never heard that acronym RATS before,
No, I
but
hadn't
I
either.
like it. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Because there's lots of assumptions. Some of them might be minor, like you're saying, and not really directionally important, or at least that's our assessment of what those are. There's others that are major, big, like caveats that totally pivot where you go based on that assumption.
And how do we identify those, do you think? Because when we get so far into the data, so far into our own stuff, it becomes difficult sometimes to even be able to see that we're making an assumption that might be risky.
I think there's the role of the devil's advocate in a group, which can be helpful to say, let's throw everything we got at this analysis and this data. Who even maybe assign that role to make sure we're avoiding groupthink, to make sure we're not just giving the loudest, most influential person in the room what they think or what they want to hear. What is the role of the individual saying, like, time out?
And when do you seek out that devil's advocate? At what part of the process do you think?
I think it's got to be, I'm a big believer in, like, starting, before we even analyze the data, I think that it's helpful to journal as a team. What do we think it's going to tell us? And what are our biases about that? Let's try to identify that even before we start to crunch the numbers. Because you sort of kind of assess the collective intuition of the people in the room.
Yeah.
And everybody then has all the cards on the table. Here's what I think it's going to tell us. Here's what I want it to tell us. I'll just be honest about that. This is the answer that would be the most convenient for me, right? And then in that sense, you kind of put yourself out there to say, well, now if that's the conclusion I jump to, well, the people in the room are going to say, well, you already told us that's what you wanted to say, and they said the same thing too.
And we'll have a healthy dose of skepticism that is probably warranted.
I think so. And you put yourself on the hook to being able to prove it now, as opposed to just trying to shortcut to your answer, the one that your boss wants, the one that you want.
Well, and when you fast forward ahead to then, when you do that process early on, then when you get to the ending, right, when you are at the point where you're communicating, now when those questions come up, you can address them in a totally different way.
Right, because you thought about it, as opposed to someone throwing that zinger when you're presenting. Isn't that convenient for you that that's your answer? And you haven't even realized that that's a convenient answer. Maybe you weren't even that honest with yourself in the process to say, yeah, this is really helpful to me and my agenda and my role or whatever. So that's baked into everything we do, and it's really hard to extract all of it. And so instead of trying to be some kind of robots that are fully objective, let's just talk about our biases and our preconceived notions, put them out there on the table. That's a real, I don't know if I've ever seen a group do that. That's a really vulnerable sort of approach, but I think that it feels like it's the right approach.
Absolutely, and it gets people talking about the right sort of things and aware of the assumptions they may be inadvertently making, and making others aware in ways that just make everything more robust.
Yeah, and the other person across the table from you is going to notice something or think of something that it just wasn't even in your frame of reference, and maybe it has to do with something that you're not that familiar with. Maybe it's a part of the business. Maybe it's a type of customer that you're not thinking about. It's outside of your mind. And so then that's where team-based analytics, I think, can really, if done right, can be something that helps us avoid some of the comments that are coming in the questions on the community, like about your riskiest assumptions, like about data you're not familiar with, incorporating other people's perspectives.
What about these biases as well, right? Of being able to identify them. What about, so I have to think, that's one of those things, if you're getting people together, you're putting assumptions out there, you're playing devil's advocate, you're pressure testing stuff, that just doing that makes it part of the process over time. But it takes time, right? It takes having a culture that is conducive. How do you, and this I feel like is a discussion we find ourselves getting more and more into over time as well, which is if you're somebody who's working with data, how do you influence the people around you that all of this stuff takes time, that it's an important part of the process, and sort of get the patience that you need on the part of your stakeholder or your audience member to be able to be robust in doing some of these things?
Yeah, I don't think anybody can themselves somehow magically create that environment. I think it takes people it takes very secure leaders that are okay with that kind of dialogue instead of just steering it the way they want it to go, And sometimes actually it takes the awareness that maybe there are certain circumstances where that's not the best approach because there isn't time. And so then you have to make a decision before you have the time to get all of that done. So those are different, I would say, contexts within which we need to make decisions as teams. And so then an assessment of how much data do we have, how much time do we have? Do we have a scenario where we have lots of time and lots of data? Let's do the most rigorous approach here, as opposed to sometimes we maybe have a lot of data, but we don't have time.
Well, particularly when the stakes are high, right? Because that's
Right.
sort of a prioritization piece that can get put into play as well.
Yeah, right. So like what's riding on this decision? If it's really a lot, like certainly like people's lives, which is the case many times in the background I've had in medical devices, that is exactly what's on the line. And so then that's why a lot of the regulatory requirements are in place to force that level of rigor, which even that can be gamed, unfortunately. But I think it takes, this is the question everybody's asking right now, which is how do we create, they call it a data-driven culture. I feel like it's more like a data-savvy culture because I don't believe data should drive it. That's a topic for another discussion, but
Sounds like a good discussion.
yeah, it's what is the way we generate that kind of culture within our working environment? I think that there's a bunch of factors, and I'm trying to put together a little assessment right now that helps chase that out. But it's like, well, what role does ethics play here?
And human intuition too, right? You talk about that in the book.
Right. Let's embrace that intuition is a part of the way we do this. The way we work with data actually has sort of these notions that bubble up that maybe we don't even know where they came from. And that isn't sort of some mystical thing to poo-poo and avoid. It's actually a beautiful part of the way the human brain works and something to just really harness, like only we can do. And so all of those things, I think, kind of play into creating this culture we're thinking about that is effectively using data, but not over-relying on it.
Yep.
Finding effective uses while also continuously improving it. So there's a lot there, and I don't think it's something that you just make overnight with a program or a little community initiative here or there. Those are all helpful. Those
Not
are
that
all
community initiatives are bad things.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a necessary thing, but it isn't sufficient, right? That in
Yes.
and of itself is not going to get rid of maybe process bottlenecks you have, or insecure leaders that are preventing their talented people from making progress, or tools that are tripping you up for one reason or another, maybe because of lack of proficiency with them.
Well, and I think sometimes we think, right, we have all this data, so like, why aren't we better at this already? But one of the things that you point out in the setup for your book is we're actually in the infancy, right? When you consider the broad range of human history and the amount of time within that we've been working with large amounts of data, it's actually a very tiny bit of that, which is one of the reasons that we make these errors and then we fall into these traps. And I think the book is a great read for anybody who's working with data because it's this really like good assessment of, here are the things that I've seen, here are the things that I've done, or here are the things I've seen other people do that are not working well. And here's how you can learn from that so that hopefully we can all help each other speed up this knowledge gain.
Yeah, it's about the learning curve there. What if we built a better immune system like a baby's body does for the next generations? What if we could do that? What if we could figure out how to really create an awareness of biases in our algorithms and in our data and propagate that forward to hopefully, this is a generational thing. We don't have to solve this problem right now overnight, but we do have to put our finger on what's going wrong. We do have to put our finger on the kinds of things that are causing harm with data. That's important to identify early. And I haven't talked to, and maybe because I'm by default, I'm talking to companies that are asking for help, but every company I talk to, and you would be really, these are big companies, these are massive organizations. Some of the most, I would say, like data, you would assume these people, if anybody thinks they're good with data, it's these people. And those are the people coming to me saying, we feel like we don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And that to me is where I started to say, oh, wow.
Does that scare you or does that excite you?
I think it's a little eye-opening. It's like, whoa, then nobody really feels like they're doing this well. Oh my God, okay, well, we are the baby here that's learning to crawl. And that's where that we got our work cut out for us. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming, but in a sense, it has a good thing to it for me and my business because there's no need for competition. Because if you were to line up down the road, the people that I have time to help this year with my little business, the real issue is like thousands upon thousands time longer than that line that I can help. And so then in that sense, my job is to also shine the spotlight on other people that are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's nice. The Canadian in me likes that. There's no competition here. We're not trying to carve up a pie. It's just like wow, the gap is so big that we all have to pitch in, you know?
And on that front, what would you say for folks listening who
Yeah.
say, you know what, this makes sense to me. How do I help push
Yeah.
this along? What's your advice for people?
Yeah, I think so. You know, and this is one thing I love about the idea of the language. It's not a perfect analogy. We're talking about speaking the language of data. Well, if we've all learned a foreign language, maybe in school or what have you, and so, you know, you learn a language when you listen to it and when you put yourself into an environment where you have to speak it. And then also when you're around people that are fluent and you learn from them, just listening to them. And so then, you know, we all play that role for each other by increasing our own level of fluency, right? Having that conversation, participating as a person who's more and more and
Asking
more
questions,
fluent.
right?
Exactly. Saying, oh, hey, the reason why I don't understand is because of this. Or maybe I'm in front of a group and instead of just showing them a scatter plot, like I build it. I take 3 or 4 steps and put the dots here and then move them and assemble this little chart for them in a way that helps them realize, because, you know, a lot of them don't know what a scatter plot is telling them at all. They're totally unaware of what that means at all. And so then, you know, kind of taking it upon myself to, in a not a condescending way, but in a hopefully quick and helpful way, in 5 to 10 seconds, can I build a scatter plot for them? 1, 2, 3 steps, there it is.
Through
and
that
this
process,
is why,
illustrate what they're looking
right,
at.
and that's why this little outlier over here is so interesting, because it's one that's here and there, right? And they say, oh yeah, and now they understand where I'm taking them. So those little things I think we can do because we're now speaking the language more fluently, also putting ourselves around people. I think of all the people in my career that I've had the benefit of learning from, they've taught me to speak this language better just by me being around them, you know. So I think that in that sense, it's a progression we're on. And so then those are things I think anybody can do. You don't have to have a business, you don't have to have a blog, you don't have to have a book. You can just do that just by being a person who is trying harder to speak that language more and more fluently every year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. You talked about this a little bit earlier on, and I said we would come back to it, so I want to make sure that we do, but this idea of communities, right? And that there are some tool-based communities that exist, but this idea of bringing communities together, which I think helps or could help with some of the things that we've been talking about too, right? Bridging those gaps. But how do we do that? Or what role do you want to play, or should people be playing when it comes to bridging some of those gaps across communities?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something I'm thinking about a lot, because there's so many strong, think about the RStats community, or I've started to kind of get connected with like the Power BI community, obviously the Tableau community, something everybody marvels about it and its strength and its connectedness and its positive energy. And those are all really good things. And then so like, how do we then build bridges? I think of it as like building bridges across maybe islands right now. And it isn't like they're on an island because that's where they want to be and they don't want to talk to anybody else. It's because, well, that's the people they're interacting with.
Sometimes
right
they walk across another bridge to another island, right?
Yeah, yeah. Every now and then, maybe some tweet shows up in their little feed or what have you. But I think the Data Visualization Society has been an amazing kind of element that got put into play last year that helped in this regard. And also, you know, I'm excited about where this can take your community, the community you just launched, because it's so important, I think, for us to facilitate conversations that get people connecting across tool-based, perhaps maybe what have turned out to be tool-based silos.
Yeah.
I also know, like Makeover Monday, for example, really started in the Tableau world, and that's great. And this is largely, there's a lot of participation there, which is awesome. But I know the leaders of that group made a conscious effort a couple of years ago to try to connect and see maybe there are people using other tools that could, you know, do the same kinds of thing. And maybe that would be really useful and helpful for all of us to understand. How did someone approach this same question with that tool? Oh, interesting. Now I can learn from that. So those are some of the ways I think we can connect by kind of also having not just tool-focused sub-communities, which will never go away, never should go away, but also having topical-focused sub-communities, or maybe just also...
Because I think that gets us asking different sorts of questions.
Yeah, exactly, which are also really important even for us to make good use of tool X, whatever that might be. And so I know like your workshops, you do also tool agnostic approaches, right?
Yeah, we don't use any tools.
So then you get to see people in the room that probably are proficient in different tools. And so I'm curious to know, how does that facilitate a rich dialogue for you and your participants?
I think for us, it's interesting because it takes the tool conversation out of it entirely. So no longer is it, well, how would you achieve that in, you know, whatever the tool is? It's, wait, what questions should we be asking about this? What does it tell us? What does it mean for the business? So it shifts the conversation in really interesting ways when people are thinking more about the decisions they're making and why they're making them versus how to accomplish it in a specific tool.
Yeah, like getting anything done, there's different kinds of knowledge. There's the knowledge about the steps required in the process and the techniques, super important, but also the knowledge that's required about how to do it well and the meaning of it and the application of it and the human component of it. It being the thing we're making, maybe it's a chart or a graph or a dashboard, maybe it's a presentation. And so then, can we make sure we're also having those great conversations about different aspects instead of, being limited in ways that I don't think anybody actually, to this day, I don't think anybody is suggesting it should be limited in that way. I just think we kind of fall into that. Maybe gravity takes us to a place where we are having conversations about tools, which is needed, but then also having energy put into having different kinds of conversations, like you're saying. Online communities, like the Tapestry Conference really taught me that. Sometimes it's in-person events, ways to get people kind of talking across those different tool groups.
And this seems to be a theme that we keep coming back to, right? Of this idea of people talking more.
Yeah.
Because we end up, whether it's you with your analytical team as you're exploring data and voicing assumptions and testing those, or conversations happening across some of these what have maybe historically become a little bit siloed communities, that we all will do smarter things as a result of some of those conversations.
Yeah, I've been thinking about like the political climate in the country to kind of take it a totally different direction. But if people sat down and had dinner with each other and their families, people that disagreed, people that are sitting there blasting each other online, would they do that if they just had dinner with them the day before and their 7-year-old son that really likes Legos or whatever? I mean, maybe I think they would treat each other differently. And so then I don't see a lot of people mistreating each other in the data community, but I do think that same function of bringing people together and helping them get to know each other across tool silos can help maybe generate even a richer dialogue there than what we've seen to date.
Because this humanization piece of it helps us be more open to other viewpoints, right?
Right.
So, ask questions openly in ways that, again, enable us to have smarter
And you just
conversations.
value the other people and what they're saying differently when you know them. And it's hard to know. That's the problem is with scale. The problem is everything's scaled at this crazy level with social media that doesn't really, that allows for this super shallow, maybe almost very superficial connectedness, but I think then we still need to have kind of deep connections that are happening and that we're fostering, and then just being deliberate about that is important.
What's next for you, Ben?
So 2020, I'm excited about this year. I've got some experiments I'm doing right now with on-demand training. I really want to reach more people that way, but I don't know how to do that well yet, so I'm going to have to learn that. That's what's next for me pretty much right now. Also kind of thinking about maybe self-publishing a book, just trying that. I did a book with O'Reilly, love them. Did a book with Wiley, love them too. I think I might want to try the self-publishing route just to learn.
Do you know what you're going to write about next?
I have a couple ideas, yeah. I mean, I think this data literacy piece that could also have books that go along with some of my programs or courses. I have a totally different idea out there about this combination of intuition and analysis that picks up on a little research I did in my MBA program, going back a ways now, that I've always had in the back of my mind. So that's maybe something for down the road. But yeah, I want to make sure I have more time to spend on that one. It's going to be probably called the Phaedrus effect, which is Phaedrus is the name of one of Plato's discourses, where he talks about the human sort of soul being a charioteer.
Okay.
And so Phaedrus is the learner who's kind of listening to this speech that's being given, but the idea there being there's different aspects of our mind and the way we think and make decisions. Some of it's analytical, some of it's emotional.
Yeah. And
how do you harness those? How do you bring them together? And that's, I think, something that's the time is right for a good book like that. Yeah. So, but yeah, those I think that one probably I need a lot of time for that one, so that might be down the road. But yeah. But anyway, that's what's next for me.
Ideas percolating.
Yeah.
I love it.
always.
Where can people stay up with the latest?
Yeah, so dataliteracy.com is my site, and they can get in touch with me there. I think probably I've started to spend a lot more time on LinkedIn. So you can find me on there, the LinkedIn profile there, just Ben R. Jones, R for Richard. And then I'm on Twitter still way the heck too much, so I'm on there at Data Remixed. But I try to have conversations there on at least a daily basis probably. Yeah, and then I'm trying to put all the announcements and some thoughts out there on my data literacy blog, which you can find from the homepage.
Great. And
Yeah.
we'll be sure to link to all of that stuff in
Thank you.
the show notes.
Cool.
Any final thoughts for folks listening today?
I do have one final thought, which is I want to say congratulations to you because you won the #1
Oh.
gold award for the Data Literacy Awards for
Hooray.
2019, being the top data podcast in the data world. So congrats to that. And so
Thank
I
you.
guess your listeners are what got you there. Yeah, congrats to you. And I know that this is a lot of effort, and I know I've heard from so many people. I've never done it, but I want to do it eventually. But I know that doing a podcast is so much work getting it right. And so my last message, I guess, would be that, thank you for what you're doing, and also Randy and the rest of the team to put these really helpful thoughts out there for everyone, whether they're listening, whether they're following along online or going to one of your workshops. I think those are all ways people are getting better and we're moving the species forward.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I love it because it gives me the opportunity to be able to sit down with folks like yourself and be able to share that conversation, because we've been talking about talking
Right.
a lot today, and we can learn and do smarter things, ask smarter questions as a result of that. So
Yep.
thank you very much for
Thank
sitting
you,
down
Cole.
with me today. For everybody listening, the next thing you should do is go out to your favorite local bookseller or online place, pick up a copy of Avoiding Data Pitfalls. And as I mentioned, we'll link to all of Ben's site and information in the show notes. Ben, it has been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening.